Welcome to Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. I'm Kristen Fields Chadwick, your podcast coach on this transformative podcasting journey. Our mission, empower Kingdom entrepreneurs to confidently launch and grow podcasts, fostering a journey of being seen, being heard, being known, and making a lasting kingdom impact. This is Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. Your voice matters. Welcome back to Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs, where I want to help you step into courage and amplify your voice through podcasting. Whether you're just starting out or you've been at this for a while, years, 20 years, even before then, growing your podcast is likely at the forefront of your mind. So today, we're going to be talking about one of the most powerful yet often overlooked tools for organic discovery, updating your podcast title and cover art. All right, so these elements are the first things that potential listeners see, and they can make or they could break that crucial first impression. I am your host, Kristen Chadwick, and as a podcast coach for kingdom-minded entrepreneurs, my passion is to help you, Christian men and women like you, say yes to using podcasting as a form to spread your message and make a real impact in this world. If you haven't listened to last week's episode on being strong and courageous, I really encourage you to go listen to that and then come and listen to this. This is like tangible help. And last week was real heart help. So go back and listen to that. If you're ready to take your podcast to the next level, I want you to stick around for this episode because it's going to be packed with actionable tips and really help you to grow your podcast to a next level. And I want to share a new program that I have for my podcasters who are ready to grow. So stick around for that, okay? So, number one, powerful first impressions matter. I want you to think about this, like as with a job interview. You want to make a great first impression. So if somebody's coming to your podcast for the very first time, your podcast title and your cover art are like the front door to your show. If they don't catch the eye or resonate with your target audience, potential listeners may never make it to your content. They might go, ooh, I don't know about that one. Now, if it was highly recommended, it might not matter, but I will tell you, it does matter. So in this segment right now, we're going to talk about how we can revamp your title and your podcast art tile, and how it can really impact your podcast discoverability and the growth. So let's jump right in. Okay, so first things first, the role of your podcast title. Your title should be clear. It should be interesting. It should be reflective of the value or the problem or the desire that you are wanting to put across to your ideal listener and your current listener. And I'm going to give you some examples today as we walk through these to help you better understand. So let's start with Betty. She's got this is pretend. Betty's got a podcast that is called Tea Time with Betty. Sweet little Betty. Okay, here's the problem with this title. It's vague. We don't know who she really is talking to or what she's going to be talking about. Now, here's where we solve this problem. We're going to ask these questions, and I want you to ask this about your podcast right now. In the title, does it include what the show is about or keywords that your listener might be opening up their Apple Podcast app or their Spotify app, and this is what they're typing in? This is how we create titles that increase our growth organically. Remember, we have a podcast to create impact. And how do we create impact is by becoming more visible. So we want to make sure that we jump in to that wave that they're putting out, right? So if you think about Tea Time with Betty, we don't really know what her show is about, right? It might mean something to her, but we just have no idea. So the likelihood of somebody that could really use Betty's help finding Betty is very, very slim. And I see this a lot, especially inside of some podcasting, guesting, interview apps where I'm like, oh, Jesus, please help them to be more discovered and more visible. And one of those ways is to get clear on what you do as a podcaster. What are you offering every week on your podcast? So, okay, let's take this example of Tea Time with Betty. She is in real life, this is why she has a podcast. She is a financial coach for women who want to have this vibe of safety, of comfort, they want a grace-filled environment where they can talk comfortably about finances. So here would be a solution. If this hypothetical Betty was my client, I would say, here's a solution. I want you to change your podcast art title to Financial Wisdom with Betty, Overcoming Money Struggles Together. Now, here's the thing. That becomes more clear for her ideal audience, those women who want a safe space to talk about their struggles together. So that's how we would shift things with her title. Another example for a podcaster to change their title of their actual podcast title is if you've created a podcast and you just threw your name out there, like the Jane Smith Podcast, and you don't want to change your name, or maybe it's just part of your brand, like you now have the janesmithpodcast.com. You've really honed in on that. And typically I will say if somebody is launching a podcast to not use your name unless you already have a massive following and people are actually searching your name inside of podcast apps. So Jane Smith, she's got this podcast, the Jane Smith Podcast. She's got an average of 1,000 listeners every month. Here's what I would do. I would say, okay, we've already got a role going here. People already know you. You have a decent amount every month coming to your podcast. How can we add an extension to your name? So if Jane Smith is maybe she's a wellness coach. And so we could add an extension on her podcast by simply adding an extension of what she does. Maybe her target audience is millennials who, detoxing millennials, or, you have to get real specific. So if her business was for millennials, she has a wellness program, she wants to feed people into that business, then you would want to make sure that any of those keywords are in her title. And you guys, here's the thing with your title. You can change your title anytime you want. And I would wait about a month and see how your download numbers go. It's really interesting to keep track of analytics in this way, because if you change the extension of your title to more keywords, like say, for instance, I changed my podcast from holistic podcasting to podcast coaching for kingdom entrepreneurs. I saw an instant shift in how many listeners I had every month. Now, as I've added a tagline to it of kingdom entrepreneurs, Christian business owners, influencers, it continues to grab those people that are searching for those type of things inside of a podcast art tile. Here's the thing though. Do not change your RSS feed. On any platform, hosting platform, your RSS feed is like your permanent address. Now, what I was telling a client the other day who was thinking about rebranding and changing her title, I said, it's not that we're moving your house. We're actually just changing the color of the paint outside. So maybe you had a yellow house before and now we're painting it white and black. We're just changing the color. So we're not changing your RSS feed. So that means you're not going to lose your listeners, your current listeners. You're not going to lose your downloads. You're simply just adding into the podcast title in your settings, this extended title. It's not going to change your RSS feed. Do not ever change your RSS feed unless you wanted to start over. Okay. Hopefully that is clear. All right. So now as we move into the next thing, so we look at our title, we evaluate, is this a clear enough title that says who I'm serving and who I'm helping and what I'm talking about on my podcast? You guys, if you need help, I have a free call that we can walk through this together. I have a 30-minute call that we can walk through this together. There's a link down in the show notes. Let's do this. If you're having trouble with your titles, come and let's walk through this together. Sometimes it's just as simple of a fix of like, hey, did you know that your podcast title might be the hiccup that people can't find you because we're not clear on who we're called to, on who we're serving and what our show is about. So simple fix. Next thing is we're going to jump into your podcast art tile or your cover art, whatever you want to call it. The podcast art tile is that visual representation of your podcast brand. It is the front door. It is the first impression. Many of us have used Canva to create our podcast art tiles, which absolutely, if that is where you're at right now, utilize Canva. They have some great templates on there. I will say I can tell the difference between Canva and a graphic artist doing a podcast art tile, which, by the way, if you need a recommendation, I love my gal so much. So if you need that recommendation, let me know. But I'll tell you some tweaks that you can make inside of Canva today to take with you. So here's what not to do on your podcast art tile. Put too many words, too busy, a picture within a picture, light, hard to read fonts, or maybe the size is too small. So what you should do is you should have some keywords that I told you about in the title. You don't necessarily have to have your whole title on your podcast. I'm telling you, if you have a long podcast name, then just put what it's about on there. Because again, like I said, this is like reading a book or judging a book by its cover. It's important. So you want to make sure it's communicating what people are going to find when they click on your podcast. So clear font, you want to make sure that it's bold font, it's big enough to read, and it's going to stand out. So if you think about how many times people will look for a podcast, that is a tiny little, maybe like 4 little millimeters by 4 millimeters. I actually have no idea how small that is, but that is tiny. So we want to make sure that our letters are big enough to read and it's clear, concise, and not overly busy, but also standing out and it looks professional. So I want to give you an example of this. So pretend, sort of, I did find, I went through Apple Podcasts and I found within like 3 scrolls a podcast art tile that I would update for sure. And let's just call this person Jen. She is a podcaster who helps women in marriage, motherhood. She talks about real life, Jesus, authentic conversations, relationships, marriage. I think I already said the marriage. On her art tile, she has a picture of podcast headphones. She has a sound wave bar right across the middle of her art tile. She uses cursive writing with pink lettering, a faded background. Are you like overwhelmed already by this description? It's so busy. And precious soul, especially as somebody who is a Christian woman, I want to go and like reach out to her and be like, can I help you with your art tile? So anyway, so here we go. We've got this art tile. So one way that we could help her is to get a clear tagline and a clear title for her, because her title right now, which I'm not going to say, is almost like too catchy. We don't want a catchy phrase because nobody searches for the catchy phrase that you think that everybody would catch on to. For an example, I'll shout myself out, holistic podcasting. Unless you knew my story from a long way back, which my original podcast was called Holistic Hearts with a W, which I have to say that every time. And then I transitioned into holistic podcasting, where I'm just talking about podcasting. You had no idea. I was not converting new or attracting new listeners, because holistic podcasting, who would be searching for that? And it actually was not even really hitting my target audience, and unless it was like friends that were referring my podcast. Do you see what I'm saying? So instead of using your catchy phrase, or this is just part of your cutesy titles that you've had for a long time, in the podcasting space, it does matter that you are clear, concise, and really to the point. So I looked at her description of this sort of pretend Apple podcast example. And in her description, she's got some of these amazing words like mental health and marriage and motherhood. And she talks a lot about scripture. So it sounds like she is really like a Christian influencer, right? So my suggestion would be, we need to scrap the art tile in entirety and maybe have a picture of her reading her Bible faded in the background. Or it's a picture of her with her friends, all of them having a Bible, and in clear, bold font, it would have mental health, marriage, and motherhood. So we would clean all of that up so that when somebody comes and they are searching for her podcast, they're going to enter in, okay, so maybe I'm a Christian that needs mental health or Christian woman marriage podcast. Her podcast would pop up now, and in her art tile, that front door, right? It's going to be very clearly this example of, oh, this looks like a community of women who are supporting each other, and they're talking about mental health, marriage, and motherhood. So simple way that we can increase our organic growth and have people discover you in just the simple act of, if you're opening up your Spotify or your Apple and you're looking for a specific podcast on that topic, say you're a life coach, or you are an entrepreneur who talks about leadership, you want to make sure that it's clear enough that Apple picks it up and your ideal listener is picking up what you're putting down. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so how do we integrate these organic ways to grow into our larger growth strategy? So that's just one piece of the puzzle of doing so. So I want to challenge you that if you want to grow your show, you've got to look objectively at what maybe you've done, but what you have been doing over the last couple of years, or maybe even 6 months. And it's time to revamp that podcast art tile. It's time to get clear on your messaging. And there are other ways that we can increase your growth, because this is probably number one question that I get asked is, how do I grow my podcast? And you guys, I want to introduce you to a brand new coaching / course that I have been beta launching with my podcast members. And I have loved watching them start this process. And now I'm opening it up to you guys, the public, because I really want you to thrive. There are so many podcasters out there that there could be these minor tweaks and adjustments and strategies that could be implemented to where you can grow. And what's the point of growing? To create bigger impact and to help support income in your life and to support others' income. And we have to continue to ask, why do we want to grow? And I really believe that God has put a light into each and every one of us as believers to shine in the kingdom, in the marketplace, in the entrepreneur space, in our motherhood, in our ministry. And this is one way of podcasting, is to amplify that message and to create that impact. So inside of this new program, it's called Master and Cultivate. If you know my history with those two words, you know why I'm using that. Master and Cultivate Podcast Growth Accelerator 90-day program. It's designed to help you take these changes and to build on them, to create this sustainable growth and to help you align your business, your ministry with what you're doing inside of the podcast. And we're going to walk through in this 90-day coaching and course intensive where we get really clear on your podcast, and we're going to discuss and walk through in real time how to organically grow in like these things of the podcast art tile and changing your title. There's so many tools that you can use in that. And then also in the area of market-based efforts like social media, newsletters, podcast guesting, paid advertisements, dynamic ads, all of these things are inside of this 90-day coaching and course intensive. And the best part of it is, I think, is the incredible amount of time that you get one-on-one coaching with me, where we sit down, we walk through this together, and I answer your questions on your specific podcasts. So if you're serious about growing your podcast and reaching more people with your message, I really ask you to consider that you at least set up this one-on-one call with me, the 30-minute call, and you take this podcast episode and go implement it. Don't let it just be information. Go look at your podcast art tile. What could you tweak? What could you tweak inside of your title? And I promise you, there's so much more to helping you be organically found, to attract more listeners, and to really update your podcast look. The heart of it is really to help you be seen by the people that need to see you. You are an answer to prayer for somebody. I promise you. I just put this thread out on Threads, the Twitter of Instagram, the other day. And you guys have gotten so much traction just from this one sentence that I said the other day. And I mean it. What if your podcast could change someone's life today? Go press record. Go get found. Go be visible. You guys, your podcast matters. Don't give up. I know that it can be hard. I know that it can feel like, man, is this even worth it? And some days it's really hard to go press record. I hear that 100%. But I promise you it is worth it. I promise you it is worth sowing the seeds and watching God multiply it. And I know I can help you grow. So again, I offer this free 30-minute consult to see if it's a good fit for you. And I promise that we can make your voice amplified and create that impact that you want to make. You guys, thanks for tuning in to Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with a fellow podcaster. Invite them to come listen. And as always, come into our community, our free Facebook community at Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. And we would love to hear from you. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening today. Hey, I want you to know that there is an opportunity for you and I to connect. I would love to do that. Find a link below and we can schedule a one-on-one free 15-minute consultation. I want to hear, where are you in your podcasting journey and how can I help serve you and help you bring that kingdom impact dream into reality?